Mm-hmm. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I think some of you are going to be on mute at the moment, probably deliberately. But welcome everyone to this session with Tees Swale Project. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes because we've found that with these Zoom meetings, it's polite to be a couple of minutes late, a bit like going to a party. You never want to be there absolutely on time. So we do get people turn up just a couple of minutes late on occasions. We are expecting, I think, 9 people to join us today. It's a little bit thin. It may be that 1 o'clock is a less convenient time for people to join these calls, but we're delighted to have you with us. So thank you very much for joining us. And we'll get started in a couple of minutes' time. So we'll just hold on for a couple of moments, see whether we get anybody else join us, and you'll let people in from the waiting room, Alex, assuming that someone turns up now. A lot of people are bashful here without their cameras on. I don't know whether that's deliberate or not. But when we get to a Q&A session, it's quite helpful if people can put their cameras on, so that if we've got any questions, I can see you raising a hand if you're not used to using the raising hand facility on the Zoom system. So perhaps when we get to the Q&A, I'll ask you if you can pop your cameras on if you're happy with that. So I think we're a couple of minutes in now, and I think we'll probably get started. So today's talk is being hosted by the Richmondshire Climate Action Partnership, and that's an organisation that was formed about 6 months ago following the local council approving an environment and climate emergency. We're not part of the council, but we work alongside the council to help support achievement of their net zero carbon and their biodiversity objectives. And today's talk is one of the events that the partnership has organised in the run-up to the COP26 conference that's taking place in Glasgow at the beginning of November. And we've got something in excess of a dozen events happening. There are still about 7 or 8 events that are going to take place between now and the 6th of November. So since I've got a few people on this call, just a quick shout out for some of those events, in case anyone's not aware of them and you think you might like to join one of those events. We've got a walk in Bishopdale that's taking place tomorrow, and that's a walk around the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust flood alleviation scheme that they've done in Bishopdale. That's 11:45 at Reba Hall in Bishopdale tomorrow. On Saturday, we've got 2 events happening. The first is the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority at Aysgarth Visitors Centre are running a presentation of their decarbonisation project for their buildings. And alongside that, the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust will have their Rivers 2U mobile classroom on site, which shows the way in which the catchment works in our local dales. In addition to that, Tunstall, the Tunstall Community Garden is open, and there is an event that will run for about 4 or 5 hours there, with lots of things for kids to do and for people to have a look at what they've done with their gardens, to look at some new recycling ideas that are being introduced. Then next Tuesday, at 5 p.m, we've got a representative from BugLife, who is doing a presentation online about the national and indeed the international beelines project that they're running, and particularly talking about the way in which the beelines runs through the Yorkshire Dales and what they're intending to achieve with that. On Wednesday of next week at 12 o'clock, we've got Plant Life, and an expert from Plant Life is going to be talking about wildflower meadows, and in particular some of the carbon sequestration benefit offered by wildflower meadows. And then in the evening, next Wednesday at 7:30 in the evening, we've got a talk by the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, who are talking about plastic-free woodlands, and that's a project that they're running particularly with the government's objectives for planting trees in mind. The government at the moment is saying they will plant 1.5 billion trees between now and 2050, and the Millennium Trust project is trying to ensure that all of the tree guards, plastic tree guards, don't end up in the sea. So they're going to talk about that. And then finally, our festival is ending on the 6th of November with a family day, an environment day at Just the Job in Richmond. If anyone hasn't been there before, it's a community project that's on the Gallowfields Trading Estate, and that will be open to families with lots of things for the kids to do if you've got kids that you need to occupy as well. So there's a little shout out for the rest of the projects that we're running during the course of the rest of this month. But let me first say thank you very much to the Tees Swale Project, and particularly to Alex Saperstein, who's joined us today. And hopefully I got the pronunciation of your name correct there, Alex. We're delighted that the project is supporting us, and we're really pleased that you're here to present this this talk for us today. So what I'd like to do before we start is just a couple of admin pieces about the way that we run these presentations. The presentation has got some slides to support it. So once I've introduced Alex, there might be a moment of delay as she switches across to a PowerPoint presentation that will come onto the screen. So just bear with us while that happens. We'll run through the presentation and then we'll do a question and answer session at the end if you've got any questions. So please hold your questions if you can. If you can resist asking them until the end of the presentation, that would be great. But if you have got any thoughts, questions, comments that occur to you during the presentation, then there is a chat facility at the bottom of the Zoom page. And if you open that up, you can type in any comments or questions that you've got, and I'll try and pick those up when we get to the Q&A, and hopefully that will then help to prompt some questions if any of you are feeling bashful at that stage. If you could all please make sure that you're on mute during the course of the presentation, that will help to avoid background noises of dogs barking or anything of that kind. And finally, I'd just like to test that nobody minds us recording this. We would like to try and record the presentation unless there's any objections, so that people who haven't been able to get to the talk today can access it through our website at a later date. So if you've got any objections to being recorded, then perhaps you could shout out now and we'll switch the recording off, but otherwise we'll continue with that. Okay, I think we're okay. So Alex, let me introduce Alex first. Alex has worked in the conservation sector since 2010, initially at Nidderdale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, before she moved to the Solway Coast AONB in North Cumbria, and then on to Teesdale, and latterly working for the North Pennines, AONB. She's been involved in developing and delivering landscape scale conservation schemes for most of that time. And she's scheme manager of Tees Swale since July, and was team member in the scheme's development from 2018. Outside of work, she can be found, she tells me, mountain biking, usually around Swale Down, or horse riding. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alex, and she's going to deliver her presentation. So thanks very much, Alex. Over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to share my screen now to bring up the presentation. And there we go. Mike, can you see that fine?
We can see that. So you're fine. You're great to go.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you to Mike for inviting Tees Swale scheme along to have a little slot. I'll be talking about Tees Swale, the Naturally Connected programme. And it's a bit of a brief overview. It's a very, very large scheme. So a bit of a brief overview, focusing on some of the nature recovery work and the youth engagement work which has taken place and will be taking place until September 2025. So this is really large scale landscape conservation. That's our aim. So this is the boundary map. So in the north there you've got Upper Teesdale. So that is in the North Pennines AONB area. Some places you may recognise as Middleton and Teesdale, which if you can see my cursor, which probably can't, that's sort of in the middle of your screen, upper middle of the screen. And then the reservoir up the top left, that's Cow Green Reservoir, which I want to say for the most part is quite a desolate place, but it has its own character and beauty, I'm sure. And then, as you can see down the bottom there, we've got Swaledale and Archengarthdale and Richmond to the bottom right. So this is really a joint partnership scheme between the North Pennines AONB and the Yorkshire National Park, which is quite unusual because we're working across our administrative boundaries, across the protected landscape boundaries. And for whatever reason, that's something that doesn't always happen quite as much as it should do within the conservation world. So this is quite groundbreaking in that sense. The total area is about 845 kilometres squared, which is ginormous for this kind of programme. Normally the scheme areas are maybe 200 kilometres squared, sometimes a bit less. So this is really a really ambitious, really big scheme. So it all started really with this paper from Professor Sir John Lawton, who he wrote Making Space for Nature white paper in 2010, and that was focused on more, bigger, better and joined up habitats. So, and he was, I suppose, sort of quite ahead of his time, saying that farmers should be paid, not subsidised, but actually paid to deliver public benefits. So that's really what we're working towards and trying to push for through Tees Swale. And John is also our chair of the board. So we've struck it very lucky, I suppose, having someone of high profile and of such a brilliant mind as Sir John to be on our chair. So we're really, really lucky. As part of our governance structure, we do have a board. So there's representatives from the AONB partnership. So the director there, Chris, and then Gary Smith from the National Park Authority. And then other people such as Environment Agency representative, Northern Heartlands, which is an arts-based organisation who operate in Teesdale and Weardale in County Durham. and some tourism representation too. So it's quite a broad board, but they do really represent the many different strands that we're trying to reach out to through Tees Swale. And I would just say, before I go any further, about our funders. So we received a lot of funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who used to be called the Heritage Lottery Fund. So they give the majority of our funding. So as part of that process, we had to develop this scheme to their standards. So back in September 2018, they started off an 18-month development phase, which culminated in us submitting a huge bid to the Lottery Fund, which we then heard back from about 6 months later that we've been successful from. So they're actually giving a total of about 5.8 million to the scheme, which is a really, really significant amount for a natural heritage project. I'm struggling to think of another one which has received such a big grant. So that just shows the profile that they've given the scheme as well. So very significant for many, many reasons. So the focus, not the focus, but the one of the main drivers for Tees Swale is around high nature value farming. So it's less intensive. It's the farming that we see around in Swaledale and in Upper Teesdale. So it's less intensive. There's meadows, there's rush pasture, a bit of moorland, and it's economically can be quite marginal. So these farms are often reliant on payments for their stewardship scheme agreements. Yet they do some absolutely brilliant work for the environment and for society. So, there might be wader habitat for curlew, lapwing. They also provide clean water, clean air, pollinator habitat. And I think something that's on our mind maybe a bit today, because it hasn't really stopped raining for most of the day, is that it can provide flood alleviation as well, in the way that so the moorlands operate, for instance, and allowing that peat to operate as a hydrological unit. So our focus with farmers is really supporting this high nature value farming system, and hopefully to influence policy further along the line so that it's recognised for all the good things that it does for the environment and for society. So the Northern Pennines have the lowest levels of habitat fragmentation and therefore the highest levels of habitat connectivity in England. The darkest bits on this map represent the Pennines. And by that, I don't mean the North Pennines, A1B, I mean the Pennines. So that broadly covers the Yorkshires and the North Pennines, A1B. So we couldn't really have a scheme that was that big, because that's a phenomenal area to try and cover. That'd be ginormous. So it was reduced down a bit to cover what we've come out with, which is Upper Teesdale and Swaledale, Arkengarthdale. And then this is just a slightly more complicated map. So that's the project area on our right. And as you can see, there's loads of priority habitat. Of course, a lot of it's blanket bog or mire, but it's a really important place ecologically. And also we have a lot of the last remaining hay meadows. Hay meadows have had a significant decline because of farm intensification, and we have those last little bits of fragments really up in Upper Teesdale and Swaledale. I'm sure you've been out into Muka and seen the fabulous hay meadows around there. For me, going up into Upper Teesdale and seeing the hay meadows around there, it's just glorious, and people come from miles around to come and see them, as well as giving the practical benefits, really good hay for the animals as winter feed. great for pollinators as well. So we've got this really special area, I think. And then this is a priority habitat map. So SSSI, sites of special scientific interest, they form 67% of the project area. So designations don't always tell the whole story, but if it's 67%, over 2/3 of it is SSSI, then that's a really good indicator that this is a very special place. But just because it is, you know, it's got all these designations, it's got all this priority habitat, it doesn't mean it's perfect. You know, there's more that we can do and there's more that we can build on to increase that connectivity between habitats and increase farmers' resilience to what might be coming from Brexit in terms of farmer payments and what we can do for the environment in terms of a changing climate as well. So then we get on to the Tees Swale program's themes. So following lottery guidance, we have to split our scheme up into 3 sections, which we have done along these lines. So firstly, there's nature recovery across the whole landscape, which means, for us, means improving the habitats and perhaps creating new habitat. And then we move on to the training and skills for those farmers, landowners, land managers, conservationists and volunteers. So that's a very, very broad audience. But there's something that we're doing for an awful lot of people to build those skills for farming heading forward. And then finally, there's the access and engagement side of the scheme, which I was quite involved with during the development of the project. And I think is real, particularly as we recover, or potentially recover from COVID, it seems to be rife everywhere, but as people come to appreciate their green spaces more and value getting out into the countryside, we need to build on that as a project team. So I think, yeah, that's a nice view of Swale Down, isn't it? So we're looking at nature recovery very much on a landscape scale through Tees Swale. And in order to do that, these are some of the things that we're looking to do on the habitat side. So starting on the top left, we're looking to restore 1,250 hectares of peatland. So I'm sure this photo will have been taken up in the North Pennines. There's a peat team in the North Pennines AONB who have been working on peatland restoration for must be 10 years now. And then there's also the Yorkshire Peat Partnership, who operate down in Swaledale, who are hosted by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And as you were seeing on the earlier map, there's a lot of peatland around in our area, which of course some of it is a bit degraded. And this photo here shows a very poor case of degradation. And the problem when peatland degrades is it doesn't store the carbon it doesn't store the carbon that's been in the peatland for perhaps thousands of years, and it dries out, it releases that into the environment. And then as our climate is changing as well, there's heavier rainfall, and the dry peat can actually just get washed away into our rivers. So on top of that then forms channels, and then you get a greater runoff from this peatland right down into the rivers and the streams, and then that can cause sudden peaks in the water levels, which then of course contribute to flash flooding. So to have a peatland in good condition acts like a sponge, and it holds a lot of this rain back and can alleviate some of the flooding that might have otherwise happened. And then on the right there, we've got a picture of hay meadow. So we're looking to restore 225 hectares of species-rich grassland, which also includes some road verges. So we're lucky enough to have in our little team 2 botanists who absolutely love getting out in hay meadows. It's where you can find them, mostly in the summer, surveying and working with farmers to enable them to understand just how special what they've got is. What we've found is that a lot of the farmers that my colleagues are working with, they know that what they've got is special, and they appreciate it and they value it. They really do value it. Yet they won't always know what the names are as such. So some colleagues have been doing some training workshops with farmers to help them identify what they have in their fields. And my colleagues, well, Ruth was so surprised just how good the uptake was amongst those, I say older men because they were older men. Farming community in Teesdale is it's probably representative of the UK as a whole. It's dominated by older couples, I should say. And they were really, really keen. They wanted to know what was in their fields. And this was a great opportunity for them to gain some of that knowledge. So we'll be building on that knowledge as the scheme progresses. And then they'll be able to identify what's in the fields. And then when the Agri-Environment Support Service, because a lot of these farmers are in stewardship schemes at the moment, so they get paid for the condition of their land. Then when that scheme changes by 2024 or so, then they will be able to identify what is in their field and therefore record to possibly Natural England about the quality of their habitat, and therefore be able to receive payment for the great things that they are doing. So yeah, the hay meadow side is really important because I said earlier, the meadows have declined significantly as more intensive farming methods have come into play. And then we're also looking to carry out some rush management for breeding waders. I do find waders such as lapwing, curlew, particularly curlew, they're slightly awkward creatures. They don't like too much rush, but they like a bit of rush. And we will be working with farmers just to control some of that rush, and particularly in Teesdale, I should say. My colleagues have found that there's some areas where there's the rush is just encroaching and it's just taking over. The winters are warmer and wetter, which is prime conditions for rush, just to get a little bit out of control. And of course the sheep don't like it. They're also a bit fussy, and it's just without something to eat it, there has to be some management by machine to control it, because otherwise that land becomes not very useful for wildlife and not very useful for stock. We're also looking to create wetlands and scrapes. So these are great for birds. So the invertebrates have somewhere to live and then become food for the birds. And yeah, a bit of watering hole as well for some of the animals that graze in those areas. And it feels like a very long list. We're also looking to plant 200 hectares of trees and scrub. So particularly, I would say, particularly more in Teesdale and Swaledale, we're lacking tree cover, scrub cover. I always thought the Swaledale was a bit lacking in trees, and then I'm sure it is in some people's experiences, but if you look the right way, say down towards Richmond, there is some woodland, but if you in Teesdale there's even less woodland. And it's very much about right tree, right place. So not planting where there's wader habitat, because say curlew, for instance, they don't like being too close to trees because it could hide the predators. And of course, not planting on bog because, well, bog needs to be wet and trees and bog shouldn't really go together. But in some carefully selected sites, we'll be planting shelter belts or a bit of stock protection. There's field trees, so field boundary trees as well. We're actually doing some work around Marrick Park, and there'll be a lot of tree planting going on around there in the coming months, actually. So working with some youngsters and hopefully a Help for Heroes group and a refugee group to plant quite a lot of trees all around there, which will have an amazing impact on the landscape and for nature. So I'm quite excited to see what that little project around Marrick Park is going to be like in a few years. I'm sure it'll be a great day when it happens in November and December of this year. So it could be great, really impactful. And then something in common, very much in common between Teesdale and Swaledale is our lead mines. So you can't go for a walk around either place without seeing some of the remnants of the lead mines, whether that's the actual structures or whether it's some spoil heaps. So the problem with these lead mines is that they're no longer in use, and when there's rainfall, it can wash some of that spoil into, so the waste product, into the water courses, which, because the spoil has heavy metal in it, so lead, it will pollute those water courses, and it can cause an issue in that particular location. But then if you combine all that lead, all that pollution, all that diffuse pollution, then by the time you get to the sea end of the river, then there can be quite some serious issues around all that metal sort of combining together, and it can cause it. I know it has caused issues at Tyne Port before now from pollution that's come down the Tyne. So yeah, it's trying to improve the quality of the water courses by carrying out some remediation work around the lead mines. We're at the very early stages of that scheme, and I really do look forward to seeing what that can achieve. When I'm out on my bike in Swaledale, the mines are everywhere. They're just part of the landscape, and these spoil heaps, you just come to accept that they're there. And it's only when there's been some heavy rain and you can see it's been washed into the watercourse, you begin to think, what's it actually doing to the streams and the rivers and the wildlife that's in those watercourses. So we're working with Yorkdale Rivers Trust and the Tees Rivers Trust to try and reduce some of those impacts. And yeah, hopefully we'll really see, not quite fix the problems, because there's an awful lot of lead mines, but try and reduce some of those impacts that come out of heavy rain. And then finally, on the nature recovery side, we've got a project with the Tees Rivers Trust, which is about, which we're moving a weir to put in a bridge to enable fish passage up the River Greeta in Teesdale. It's fairly self-contained little project, and to plant some trees along one of the riverbanks. So quickly, I will just go through. That doesn't want to play ball. So this is just a photo of some upland hay meadow restoration. So that's the first photo on top left is cutting green hay, and then that's been put into a clean muck spreader. I'll emphasize the clean part of it. And then the bottom left is sort of scarifying the field that's going to be restored into a hay meadow. And then that is the bottom right photo shows spreading the green hay. Now, we don't tend to, so we wouldn't take two fields, one in Teesdale, one in Swaledale, to do this. The donor field, so that field in the top left, will be very close to the field in the bottom right, so that the species retain some of their locality, and we get right species for that particular area. So we have lots of experience of hay meadow restoration in Teesdale, in the North Pennines A&B team, and the National Park team as well. There are lots of experience of it, in particular with Ruth, the officer who works out at Teesdale, and Krista, who works with the National Park. Between them, they've got a huge amount of experience. And then this is just a photo showing some of the sites of diffuse metal pollution. So this is actually in Teesdale, but for any of you that's been up, I'd say the top of onto Great Pinseat, I always think it looks a bit like a moonscape. And this picture on the top left very much reminds me of that moonscape type landscape. So yeah, you see nothing grows except a few, particular type of plant that likes the lead-rich ground. But yeah, I think it's quite stunning what's happened as a result of the lead mining legacy in the areas. So that's working with the Environment Agency and the Coal Authority, who in the Coal Authority have oversight of the redundant mines these days. So the farmers, landowners, absolutely crucial in all this process around nature recovery. So during development phase, two colleagues of mine, both of whom still work on the project, Ruth and Patrick is there in the bottom left. They went out to about 100 farmers over the two areas and spoke to them one-on-one, sometimes taking a few hours over it, site visits, assessments, surveys, or just trying to work and come up with solutions that work with the farmers, how they farm and what they want, and inputting some of their expertise. Ruth, her background is botany. Krista, who works in National Park, her background's also botany, but she lives on a farm. And then Patrick, he is farming stock and he worked for Natural England for many years. So he's got a really good understanding of the realities of farming, as well as all the sort of behind the scenes Natural England advice that comes out. So we've got a fantastic farming and nature team who really know their stuff and really have built up very close relationships with farmers to come up with these solutions that work for them. So this is the sort of thing that they might come up with. So this will be one of Patrick's over in Bouldersdale and Loondale. So yeah, they'd come up with these maps of where it would be appropriate and beneficial to do works. Like I said, with trees, it's right tree, right place. So it's having an understanding of how the farmer works their farm and the topography as well, and any scheme that those farmers are in and what that scheme allows or does not allow, because some of these schemes, they cover quite a lot of different elements, and we can't give lottery funding for something that's already covered by a scheme payment that these farmers already get. So I've mentioned about some of the training with farmers around plant identification. So also doing some training of skills, so allowing farmers to do habitat assessments, helping them, guiding them on how to do that. There's been some skills for contractors, so that there are contractors out there who we know that say the National Park or ourselves can go to, who have the skills and the knowledge to do what is asked of them. If that makes sense, because if you've always done something in a certain way, to then do something in a slightly different way, which isn't necessarily what you've always done, can be a bit of a challenge. So it's just, say with scrape creation, it is literally a small indent in the ground. It's nothing significant. It's not a pond. It's a small indent in the ground, and it's having messy edges, having shallow edges. It's not very neat, and that isn't necessarily what contractors always have to do. So it's just providing some skills training for those contractors, and then looking at maybe slightly new ways of doing stuff, land management trials. I know we've done some around rush management. So yeah, it's finding new ways of doing things that that this lottery fund money can enable us to do, which ordinarily you don't get funding for. And I said that the farmers are really key. So farming clusters are forming around Upper Teesdale, which is Ruth's Patch. So I would go back to the main map, but it's quite a lot of slides back. So that is above Middleton and Teesdale, up to Calgary and Reservoir. And then you've got Patrick's Patch, which is around here, which is the Baldersdale and Loondale area. And then you've got Christa's area, which is the Swaledale area. And in particular, the Upper Teesdale group, they're really coming together and talking to each other. And also it provides some social time for the farmers. Farming is a lonely occupation. And I think perhaps more so in Upper Teesdale, because there's a few farmers who maybe just be by themselves, or they were just working with their partner. And yeah, there's an isolation challenge there, and particularly during COVID when they weren't seeing anybody. So to have this social time is actually a really, really important thing. It may not be something that you can measure and report back to the lottery, but it's a really crucial thing for the area, and allowing the farmers to feel involved. And of course, having their voices heard. So like when they're sitting down as they are in this photo. So talking about rush management, what is the best approach? They can share their ideas and share their views, and perhaps go on a site visit, and feel that they've been heard, because I think that's one of the challenges that farmers have faced a lot, is actually being heard. So linked to that, some of the on-farm demonstrations. So there was a hay meadow restoration demo. We'll be looking at a peatland site demonstration as well. And then we're also aiming to take some of the farms away to sites where changes have been made, farmer-led changes, and that's led to improved management, and perhaps improved economic return as well. So moving on to the other elements of the scheme. So the access side, I'll just skip through this quite quickly. That's about promoting and doing physical work on some of the multi-user routes, so walkers, cyclists, horse riders, and enhancing the rights of way network. It's quite a simple one, but of course it's never simple to carry out in reality. So yeah, but you can see definite changes on the ground. So when I was out around Swale there not so long ago, and on the Swale Trail, there's been some fencing put up, and I call it the really awkward gate, the little wicker gate next to it, the little wooden gate. But yeah, some new fencing, a lot easier to get through, and it just enhances the experience for everybody to use the rights of way network. And then we come on to the youth engagement side. So we're looking to work with youngsters between the ages of about 8-year-olds up to 24 years old, from the places listed up here, as well as Prince's Trust, and then engage with the Myrick Priory Outdoor Education Centre as well. We are very aware of how disconnected some youngsters are from the natural environment, and it's the opportunity for them to find out, you know, something that they may not ever experience, they may not ever have the opportunity to see. So just be able to engage with them and have repeat visits, and to come out, enjoy it, see something new, create their own memories. And that's the key thing of this. It's not telling the young people what they should be doing and what they should be valuing. It's enabling them to have their own response to it. And this photo is actually of a Princess Trust group in the development phase. They did some work at Bowley's Visitor Centre where they stood. The work didn't last too long, maybe about an hour and a half, until the wheelbarrow races got a bit out of hand, which weren't planned at all. But when I went back about 10 weeks later, the memories that they had were so vivid, and they all had something positive to say. They all remembered it, and they could all recount what they did on that day very, very well. And hopefully they'll just take some of that feeling and ahead with them, and they'll come back and visit this area or another green space and value it. And then we're also working with schools, so primary schools, secondary schools, in and outside the scheme area, and then offering things like the John Muir Awards, and encouraging Duke of Edinburgh Award groups as well to come out. I think, yeah, they've been a little bit awkward to engage with so far of schools because of COVID and all the extra pressures that they're under. But we really, really hope that they can come forward and we can do some really great work with the school groups, because kids respond so well to being outside. And again, some of them, particularly say outside our area, say Darlington or Stockton, they might never have been out into the area. So just to give them a chance, give them an opportunity. And then of course we've got events for the public, which is a range of events. There'll be a link at the end of this to sign up to our newsletter. So all our events go up for our newsletter. And of course, we've got the community-led arts programme, which is just starting. So this arts is often seen as something extra, you know, it's a bit on the side, it's a bit nice, but we want art to be a way for people to engage with, a different way for people to engage with landscape, who may not be in school, who may not be in that youth age range. So this just offers a different way for people to engage. The bottom right one, I'm sure quite a lot of you will recognise that. That's in the garden in Reeth by Hudson House. And then the creature on the left is one, might not be in situ there, but there's a trail of these insects going from low force to high force along the Pennine Way. And they were created with an artist a few years ago now. I'm really sorry, I'm just going to have to put the cat out of the room. He's just barged in and he's meowing at me. No, go on, go away. Sorry. And then, of course, to understand all of this, we have the interpretation elements, so walks, leaflets, guides, information boards, and then, of course, all the interpretation that our staff team can provide kind of one-to-one basis. And something that I'm really excited about, and so far has just proven brilliant, is the traineeships. So we will be working with about 16 trainees over the scheme. So they're based farming and nature, engagement and access. And we have 4 at the moment, and they're brilliant. They're all not just quite out of university, but between the ages of say 22 and 26, and just great. Just they're very, very competitive to be appointed, and they're an absolutely invaluable part of the team. The guy on the left in this photo, Alistair, he was a trainee at the North Pennines, many years ago now, and he now runs the peatland programme on the ground. So yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity for trainees, young people, to get real life work experience. So just a quick bit on how to get involved in Tees Swale, if that's what you're interested in. There's botanical surveying, and that training takes place in June. There was quite a lot this summer. A lot of new people were really, really keen to get involved, which is fantastic. And so that's literally just going out onto hay meadows, and I'm not sure it's always nice and sunny, but carrying out some of the quadrats and surveying what's there, all trained, lots of training is available. And then there's the bumblebee and pollinator surveys through the Bumblebee Conservation Trust charity. So yeah, bee walks or UK pollinator monitoring scheme, and I know this is quite active in both areas. Some good uptake from people interested in being able to carry out some of these surveys. And then of course the seed collecting, which seems to me very much like a lottery. So you have to time it exactly right, because some of these flowers, some of these wildflowers will look, I'm no expert, but they look like they're just about ready, but not quite ready. And then say Ruth will go back the following day and they've already shed all their seed everywhere. So we do a lot of collecting seeds to then plant out into pots to then grow on, because sometimes it's better to plant an actual plant rather than do seed sowing in a field or green hay restoration. So I think this was a session, see the sort of, I think this was a couple of years ago in development phase, pre-COVID. And then of course there's that process of planting out in meadows along the edges and monitoring how successful that's been. With our huge woodland planting, tree planting target, there's lots of tree planting sites. So these are often smaller sites, and then checking that trees are established and tree guards. Mike, you mentioned about the YDMT's tree guard collection system, and we're involved in that, so that's really positive. And then there's also some seed collecting of local tree species in Teesdale. We're trying to establish a tree nursery so that we can grow local stock for that Teesdale area, which I think is quite interesting, especially when there's been so many tree diseases recently. So local stock for the local area. And then of course, access volunteers monitoring some of these promoted routes that will be making available to local to people to go and explore. Engagement volunteers as well, with loads of school groups and youth groups, events, and just to have some really keen people who can share their own experiences with some of these young people, absolutely fantastic and be really, really valuable. So this is our, I want to say motley crew. This is our team. It is quite a large team. I haven't quite got photos of everyone because I don't think it would have fitted on. So most relevant to Swaledale is Krista, who's Farming and Nature Officer. That's her contact details there. And then Mark, who only started in August, but is doing a fantastic job so far, building up the community engagement offer in Swaledale. So we said groups out from Leyburn Way, from Coverdale, wants to work with Help for Heroes, and there's been a few other groups as well. And then Karen and Kerry Ann job share the role over on the Teesdale side. And yeah, that's the link. I'm sure I can send those 2 links on to you, Mike, if you could be able to share them out, because yeah, people won't be able to pull them off this screen. But that's about all. I feel like I've done a bit of a jog through that. These are all our funders along the bottom. So the lottery fund on the left there, that's the most significant, but we couldn't at all do it without the likes of the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, YDMT, obviously National Park and Richmondshire District Council. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
That's wonderful, Alex. Thank you very much, and thank you for a wonderful whistle-stop tour of the most enormous scope of works, and for competing with probably the most vocal cat that I think I've ever heard.
Yeah,
you did very well competing with your cat. So we're going to turn over to Q&As if anyone's got any. But before we start that, and perhaps just to kick it off, looking at your map, it struck me that within the scope of the project, an enormous amount of the land is owned by quite a small number of very large landowners, and the Teesdale section, that no less than Swaledale and Arkengarthdale, really. And I'm quite interested to understand how the big landowners who often own the land that the tenant farmers are on as well have responded to the Tees Swale project as a whole. What sort of support you're getting from them? What sort of level of engagement?
So in Teesdale, the main landowner is the Raby Estate, and the chief exec, Duncan Peake, he's actually on our board, which is, I think, is a really positive thing. And they've been so supportive of the scheme. So yeah, we can't really ask anything more of them. They've been really, really good. And there's also other landowners around Teesdale who we've engaged with closely. And again, the agents who represent them have been helpful. Yeah, really helpful. And then around Bouldersdale and Loondale or Patrick's patches, quite a lot of that land is privately owned by individuals. So it's quite, in Teesdale, there's quite a difference within the area. In Swaledale, we've engaged with the landowners, or their agents, I should say, and it's generally been receptive. I can't think of an example where it hasn't been receptive. Possibly on my side, because I only started in July. That's somewhere that I need to re-engage those relationships a little bit. But that just comes from staff turnover, moving on. So yeah, it's been positive, I'd say. There hasn't been any issues that come to my mind.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. For people who would like to ask a question and you haven't got your camera on, you can use the facility at the bottom of the screen that puts a hand up on your screen. I can pick that up. For anyone else, just wave, and I'll give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. We go to Gwen. Gwen's put her hand up. Let's have a question from Gwen.
It's really brief. I just wanted to say that I have to go. I feel quite overwhelmed, really and truly, by what you've been doing, what you are doing. And I would like to receive those emails. So if there's a possibility that I could get involved with something, that'd be great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And I'm glad I made it.
Good.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We've got your email, so we'll do that, Gwen.
Thank you.
Smashing. Okay. And anybody else like to ask any questions? Just one question perhaps from me that occurred to me. Again, in your presentation, you showed that 85% of some of these areas are covered by current SSSI. Does that create restrictions on what you can actually do? Is that an impediment to what you're trying to do, or does it actually advantage you?
Oh, that's a good question. It shows that the value of the land and the habitat is well, is recognised, and it's something that we work with. So I wouldn't call it an impediment. It's something we have to go for permission from Natural England to be able to carry out some of the land, some of the works on that land. So yeah, it's something that we're just used to working with. So to view it in a negative or a positive light doesn't really occur to us.
Are there financial benefits that people enjoy from having an SSI on their land, though, that means that you can't do work through the Tees Swale Project because that would conflict with other grants that you might give?
Yeah. So we'd know what, say, was in a farmer's agreement to manage that land originally, and then we have to work around that. So we aren't double funding, for instance, and we aren't giving money that should, we aren't giving money for something that the farmer should already be doing. Right. So we just, we find our way around it and through it, and work with farmer, work with Natural England to find the best results.
And does the same apply to the ALMS schemes with all of the remuneration for farmers about to change or be phased out and the new ALMS schemes phased in? Does that act as a constraint on how quickly you can move with some of this stuff, because you don't really know what's coming down the pipeline? Or can you still get on with the work that you'd planned to do despite that?
So we have a good relationship with DEFRA and with the lottery. So if a farmer was to go into do some work through the lottery funded scheme, then there is nothing to stop them once an ELMS agreement might happen, environmental land management scheme might happen, for them to then enter into that ELMS agreement. So normally you'd have quite a long legacy period for a lottery funded agreement. So this will allow us to offer more to farmers so that they can do the works now, not wait until they find out, or we find out, what these ELMS schemes are about and what can be done through them. But yeah, our farming and nature officers, they've got quite a challenging time because we don't know and they don't know what these ELMS agreements, how they're going to be set up, and the finer detail of it. And a lot of these farmers, they're already in stewardship agreements at the moment. Yeah. And of course, we can't double fund what they already should be doing and what they're already getting money for. So yeah, in some ways we're trying to prepare the farmers for ELMS, so the farmers won't be penalised for things that they've done, good things that they have done. They don't need to be penalised for that. They need to be recognised and congratulated on doing that, and being put in the best possible position to be able to take forward a new stewardship scheme when they come live.
Good, smashing. Thank you very much. Have we got any other questions? Anybody got any burning questions that they want to raise? You can either wave at me or you can hit the hand at the bottom of the screen. No, I don't think so. Right, well, it falls to me really to say thank you very much, Alex, for taking the time, and thank you to the Tees Swale Project for joining us in our festival. We're absolutely delighted to have had you as a part of that. We wish you every success with the project that you're undertaking, and we look forward to being a part of what you're doing and to making it a success.
Thank you very much, Mike.
With that, thank you to everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please do think about joining some of the other events that we've got going on between now and the 6th of November. We hope to see you at some of those, and thank you and bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.